Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by James Bond. Wait, does James Bond really need a tuxedo? I mean, he's a spy that drinks on the job while saving the world from disfigured villains and hitting on every woman he meets. Seems like more of a tank top situation. Now, let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Realm and Conquest, the new YA novel about dreams that'll have you questioning your reality. Pick up a copy of Realm and Conquest. Welcome, everyone, to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we're filmmakers, writers. I'm a full-time writer-director, and occasionally, a song and dance man as it goes with us. No, not at all. But it is funny, we're used to creating. We've been creating for a while. I think it's funny just because creating is such a beast. You've been doing it for probably as long as you can remember. I know I've been writing since I was in elementary, telling stories. And I think the hard part about creating is coming to the realization that you're not going to make anything new. And that's really hard. It's hard to kind of understand that there are no new ideas. And that also means that at some point, right, you're going to make something that sounds a lot like something else someone else has already made. And you have to kind of step away from that idea of I'm failing if I don't recreate the wheel, right? And I think Indiana Jones is an interesting slight case study of that, because apparently, man, I don't know if you've heard this story before. Spielberg wanted to do James Bond. He was really excited about it, and he apparently put together a pitch. He went and pitched it to the producers. James Bond has had the same family kind of running and producing it from the inception. And so I guess he went, talked to these producers, pitched his idea, and they shot him down. They're like, this isn't a Spielberg thing. And
wow.
They're like, we're going a new direction, actually. And so he was kind of bummed, and he was talking to his buddy, George Lucas, about it. And George was like, hey, man, I've been working on something that's even better. It's like Bond, but better. It's about an archaeologist. And I'm sure it's like, wait, that's better than James freaking Bond. And yeah, he's like, okay, say less. Let's do it. And that's kind of where Indiana Jones came from. George Lucas had been working on this, on the side of producing, one of the biggest franchises in world history, Star Wars, and threw this to Spiels, and off he went, right? He created a whole new franchise because originally he was wanting to do something similar, right? He wanted to do James Bond. And so this is Spielberg's version of a James Bond film. It's wildly different,
wow,
as I'm sure we'll get into, but that's wild. He had a taste for something, and he had to make up his mind, it's okay that I'm not exactly imitating, but I'm thinking along the same lines. I'm just going to make it my own. And this is what came out of, a few people in a room creating something for themselves, inspired by something completely different. And I don't know how you go about it. I know I definitely fall into this trap of, I remember last year, after maybe for 2 or 3 days had finished my first draft of this feature script, and I get an email from the Alamo Drafthouse, the local theater chain, and it's like, hey, there's a new little indie film called Gaia, and it's come check it out. And I was like, Gaia, and that already sounded off an alarm, because I'm playing in kind of the same kettle of fish. And I watched the trailer, and it was a lot of the same ideas that I was playing with. And I immediately was just fraught. I think I texted you immediately. I was like, what the, and I was just cursing and was upset. And I was like, whatever, I'm going to go watch it. So I go and watch it. And it didn't take long to realize, yeah, and on a higher macro level, we're both playing in some of the same ideas, but the execution is so radically different. No one's going to confuse my film for this. And at the end of the day, it's you who is going to make your idea its own thing. You could start with the same broad idea And whenever you get into the specifics and, one taste of a storyteller versus another storyteller's taste, like they're going to turn out completely radically different. Who cares if some of the same ideas are laced, or maybe even the same story? You could take the same screenplay and have two different directors make it, and they're going to be two completely different films, even if it's the same, screenplay. I don't know. How do you think about like treading the same water as someone else and dealing with that fear of unoriginality?
It's a good question. I mean, I try to not think about it, because the moment you think about it, you're kind of like in it, that you're kind of doing it for the wrong reason. I mean, at least musically, well, whatever you could talk about in any kind of creative capacity. Yeah. You could look at it as a glass half empty thing and say, oh, you're not going to make anything new. But really what it is not, I need to make something entirely new. It's, I need to make something more me, whatever that might be. And so, like, for example, if I'm working at on a song or something, or I sit down and I say, I want to make something, but I don't know where to start. I'll think of a song I really love, and I'll think, I'm going to write that song. I'm going to write as much like that song as possible. And it's, Everything in Its Right Place, Radiohead. I'm going to write that song. I'll sit down and with every intention to do it exactly the same way. And it will sound nothing like it when I'm done. But it was a place to start. So yeah, and they did the same thing. Radiohead did the same thing, but they were modeling the Beatles, or they were modeling Queen, or they were modeling, they loved, I don't know, Depeche Mode, whatever. Everybody's influenced by everybody else, and so just embrace it. This is a great example, the story you just told is a great example of, like, Indiana Jones never would have happened had it not been for Bond, right? So let's take a Bond and make it like pretty much opposite. Right. This guy who fails all the time, right? Who's rough and just messy and funny and like curses and just like is not proper. You would never see Indiana Jones drinking a martini. You know what I mean? Who doesn't wear anything close to a suit, right? Who's always dirty, who gets to the nitty gritty. Like, yeah, let's do something the opposite, but it has to start from something, right? It has to start from, and in this case, it was, Spielberg, his love for Bond, that kind of individual who will get it done. The core is that with both of them, the core is, I trust every bit of ounce of effort will be given to the mission, whatever that mission might be, whether that's saving the girl, whether that's, finding the Ark, whether that's, stopping the henchmen from destroying the Earth, whatever, that you trust that both 007 and Indy will die trying. And that's the core. So you start with the core and then you build something around it that you feel, you don't even have to think about making it different in a way. You just make it, and then it just has to be different. Yeah. Because you're a different individual than the person who made Indiana Jones or the person that made Gaia. Like you have your own things. And if it's too similar, and you think it's too similar when you're done, you can always change little things here or there that change everything. Because we talk about on the podcast all the time, it's the little things that really matter. It's not the plot. It's the things around the plot. The plot is kind of the thing you're talking about where we say you're not going to make anything new.
Right.
All the plots have been done, right? Let's just go out and say that. All the plots have been done, usually, like, for the most part. So, but if you change the little things enough, that will eventually change the plot, right? Or even if it doesn't change the plot, it'll change how it ends up. And maybe it makes the ending, even though it's a typical ending, feel different. right?
Yeah.
If the way that you get there is different, then the ending is technically different because you feel different, right? It's all about feeling and emotion, and how you get something across is just as important as what you get across. Is Indiana Jones success? Well, first off, let's do spoiler alert. If you haven't seen Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark, pause this episode, go watch it, because we're going to spoil everything. Ready? I'm going to pause for 2 seconds. Okay, cool. Here we go. Is Indiana Jones successful? Yeah. Does he win at the end of the day? Yeah. Is that the typical ending? Yes, it is. Is James Bond successful? Does he win at the end? Yes. He wins. So my point is that the plot is, you have this guy who has to go through this journey. He has to fail a bunch of times, and then finally he finds a way to defeat the bad guy. That's been told. That's every story almost ever told. But the way you get there, right? The way that Indy gets there in Raiders is a completely different way than James Bond gets there. They fail, sure. They hit walls, sure. But the way they get there is the story.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm going to butcher this quote, but there's a writer. I don't remember who it was. It might have been J.D. Salinger, someone else. But the idea was writing versus style, or maybe it was story versus style. Like the story might be, a guy drives from one end of town to the other. The style is how he gets there, right? It's not just the journey itself. It's not the beats. It's how does he get there? Do you cut to him at the store grabbing a beer, or is him just getting to the store this whole freaking journey? I'm out of gas. I got a flat tire. I got held up, at a railroad, whatever. There's a million things that could happen along the way, or it could just be a music track, right? Let's throw on a track and we're going to watch him cruise through town. Like, those are three radically different styles to the same concept of someone just getting from point A to point B. And to your point, like, this is a story that, you're right, I never thought about it that way. He does, at the end of the day, arrive to the same, ending that Bond might, right? He ultimately walks out on top. But how he gets there is so backwards from how Bond would get there, because, like you said, Bond would never get dirty. He's in a suit that he karate chops 50 people and a button never pops. Like, that's Bond. Whereas, Indy can barely keep his hat on. Like, he's just holding on in his dirty leather jacket and a bullwhip. And yeah, it's radically different conclusions with the same overall big idea. And I love what you said at the start of your point, which was, if you feel like it's too similar to something else, the problem is you need to make it more you. God, I love that. Because you are your own person. You're a unique person. You have your own taste. You have your own things that you enjoy. And if you make it a little bit more to your taste, it'll be more specific and it won't feel like anything anyone else has ever done. And that's cool. That's something that people will connect with, ironically, right? That's something that's just so specifically you, they can connect with that. If you make something that you're trying to make other people enjoy, that might be a little bit harder for them to connect with. It's a bit of a paradox, but probably a really good guiding light at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, that's it really. It's just everybody has their own way of telling a story, right? It doesn't mean that whatever you make is going to be great or right, or like different enough even. Maybe it's too similar still, but I think that in your heart, you kind of know that. In your heart, you kind of know, maybe I'm not good enough yet, but if I keep going, I will be. And if I love it enough, then I'll just keep doing it, which means I will get better, and that's the thing. So it's not like a catch-all, just be yourself and it's going to be good, but it is something that you'll be more proud of at the end of the day, right? Instead of but I guess my whole point is that it can start by trying to copy. That's it. It's totally okay. Because it's not like you're taking something it's not like you're plagiarizing words, right? Words are final. If I go and I copy words from someone else, that's final. It is exactly the same word for word, literally. That's why, we say that. But when you're talking about taking an idea is just that. It's just an idea. But there are millions of tendrils that are connected to that idea that make it what it is. So it could be it's the same idea, but it's shot differently, right? Obviously, the words around, if you're talking about a film, the words around it are going to be different. The actors are going to be different. The thing that they bring to the table whenever you film them is going to be different. Their interactions are going to be different. And if you shoot it more close up or something, the feeling is totally different, even though it's the same exact story, right? Yeah. But it starts with something that's just going to kick off an idea or kick off a passion, right? When you feel it, it. I know you know it. When you have this, when you start something, right? You don't know where it's going to go, and all of a sudden something clicks, and you're like, oh, I'm really liking this. I don't want to be anywhere else than right here doing this right now. Okay, now I've got something. That's the moment that you look for. Is that moment of, I would rather be in this room right now doing this than anywhere else in the world. I don't want to be on a boat in Cabo San Lucas. I don't want to be, hiking in the woods. I don't want to be anywhere else but right here, right now. And then you've got something. Just look for those moments, because those are the ones that are fleeting and are hard to find. And when you find them, you got to capitalize on them. But they only come if you start, and just giving yourself a little bit of leeway to start from something that already exists is okay. In fact, I think it's a great way to start, because you're starting from something that was already successful. Right? Something that already has proven to be great.
And that you connect with, that means something to you.
And yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I love that. Yeah. And it's tricky because sometimes it's tough to also avoid plagiarism. And that's kind of the line that we're talking about. It's one thing to start, like you're saying, inspired and say, I'm going to create this thing. And you deviate one little time and suddenly becomes its own thing. And then just like you said, copying word for word. That's tough. I've certainly done that, once, where I looked up, I was so stressed about a project, and I finished it, and I had 1,000 things. And in one section of this project, after it was done, I realized, what did I just do? It still gives me night sweats. And maybe ultimately not that big a deal, but for me, as a creator, that's just the single worst feeling in the world, to feel like I just totally aped someone else's work. And I've made it a big point in the future to be like, no, just take inspiration, but make sure you don't inadvertently, and it really was inadvertent. It's just trying to meet a deadline, and you're like, oh, this is cool. I'll do a little bit of this. And it just, you hit your deadline and look up F my life, good Lord. But yeah, no, it still gives me nightmares and keeps me up at night. Even though this was a decade ago. It's when you're starting out, you're just trying to figure it out. And so, yeah, plagiarism, not good, but inspiration, amazing. Do that. Totally. For sure. But yeah, we're going to look at a few things for Raiders of the Lost Ark. We'll look at some of the cinematography, the framing, blocking, some cheating, if you will. We'll look at some of the story and writing, setting up the supernatural, Indy, the hero, and some of his epic failures, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. Archaeology professor Indiana Jones ventures to seize a biblical artifact known as the Ark of the Covenant. While doing so, he puts up a fight against Renee and a troop of Nazis. Directed by Steven Spielberg, screenplay by Lawrence Kasdan, cinematography by Douglas Slocombe, featuring Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, Karen Allen as Marion, Paul Freeman as Renee Belloq, and John Rhys-Davies as Sallah.
You know, 5 years ago, I would have gone after it myself. I'm really rather envious.
Got to locate Abner. I think I know where to start. So she'll still be with him?
Possibly. Marion's the least of your worries right now, believe me, Indy.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean that for nearly 3,000 years, man has been searching for the Lost Ark. Not something to be taken lightly. No one knows its secrets. It's like nothing you've ever gone after before.
Oh, Marcus, what are you trying to do? Scare me? You sound like my mother. We've known each other for a long time. I don't believe in magic, a lot of superstitious hocus pocus. I'm going after a find of incredible historical significance. You're talking about the boogeyman. Besides, you know what a cautious fellow I am.
So, Todd, I don't know what I don't know what to call it, your relationship with Indiana Jones is. But I'm curious, for one, was this a meaningful series for you growing up? Because it's such an odd film, especially Raiders, for you and I, because this is, before our time, but at the same time, we've never grown up and to that point, we've always grown up in a world where Indiana Jones existed. He's always existed for us. And so it's hard for us to understand the impact this movie had on filmmaking and the culture. And every time I hear older filmmakers talk about this, it feels like this was a dividing line in cinema of there's before Raiders and there's after Raiders. And so it seems to be like a really important film in, not just adventure, storytelling, but also in just, style in a lot of ways, I'm sure. But that also doesn't mean that it necessarily needs to hold up for the past 40 years. And so for you, let me know how this lands for you during your youth, but also, do you think, it holds up as well as it did back then?
I loved it growing up. I mean, it was everybody wanted to be Indiana Jones, and I think mostly because he was relatable. James Bond was not relatable. Nobody was James Bond. Nobody could be James Bond. James Bond was the girls want to get with him, guys want to be him kind of dude. He was like the rock star, right? But unattainable. And Indy was different. Indy was the everyman's 007. And Indy was, who I wanted to be when I grew up, because he knew there were dangers. He knew he'd probably fail, and he did it anyway. It was Indiana Jones, right? And before I even knew that it was a persistence game, it was something that taught me a lot. Taught me that there's a cost to things, and that you'll stumble, but you just keep going. It was kind of like Rocky in a way. So I growing up, I absolutely loved it. I mean, watching it again, there's a sense of nostalgia, obviously, that I have, and seeing Harrison Ford that young is just love it. I just absolutely love it. I mean, it's like watching Star Wars again. You're just like, oh my God, a young Harrison Ford is just so cool. I don't know why. I just love young Harrison Ford. As for, does it hold up? I mean, I'll be completely honest. Yes, in so many ways, and no in a few, right? But tell me any 1981 movie that will hold up to 2022.
Right.
None of them will. Absolutely none. I mean, maybe Blade Runner, but I wasn't even a fan necessarily today of Blade Runner. We have that episode, right? So, but this is much more fun to me. Blade Runner is like, I don't want to talk about it too much, but it's just like very dark all the time. And this is a lot of fun because of what you said earlier. Like, he gets his shit handed to him all the time. Stuff happens that is completely out of his control. He loses his weapons and stuff. And then He thinks that he kills Marion, that it's his fault that Marion dies. And so like all of the, it's an emotional roller coaster, right?
Mm-hmm.
For him as a character. And I think that was done unbelievably well. I think that the character development, the exposition, the camera work, the writing in general, the sets, the set design, oh my God, the action sequences. Think about 1981 and that car chase where he is fighting in the truck and then goes underneath the truck and then comes around and kicks the guy from the side, comes in the side of the truck. Think about doing that in 1981. Think about those stunt actors who fell out of the trucks and rolled down the hill. Those are real people. This is not CGI bullshit. This is like real deal. It was unbelievable. So I absolutely, I'm taking my mind and putting it back in 1981. And I think that's important to do when you watch this movie, because there are a few cheesy parts that like between him and Marion, there are a few cheesy parts and stuff. But for the most part, like I love her as a character. She is strong. I mean, the first thing she does is punch him in the face. And then and then right after that, when the bad guys, whatever you want to call them, come and want the medallion, she won't give it to him. She knows that it's going to be, she's going to get it handed to her, but she won't give it to him. She's like super strong. And I absolutely love the way they develop her. And I love the way that they shot this too, because, and the brilliance and the, of Spielberg, I think this is one of my favorite movies that he's ever done, because, there's a story. So the shoot, I think we may have talked about it, but the scene where he shoots the guy with the sword in the street.
Yeah.
When they were filming that, everybody was sick. I think it was like the food was making everybody sick on set, and Harrison Ford was really sick. And so he just didn't want to do a fight scene, and they had a fight scene planned that they had been planning. And so he said to Spielberg, he said, "Can I just shoot him?" And Steven said, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Absolutely." And so that's what he did. And so that's what's in the film. But the brilliance of Spielberg to allow flexibility, in areas on a film that he was so invested in and wanted to do so passionately and loved, says a lot about a director. And then, trust in his actor, Harrison Ford, and like, how are you going to do it? Because the way he does it is just as important as the fact that he does it. He does it so nonchalantly, like, I can't be bothered with this guy. And it's perfect. It's absolutely, and it's iconic. It's like one of the most iconic scenes in cinema. It's like up there, right?
Yeah.
But to have the foresight as a director to allow that change, you've been planning for weeks to do a fight scene and now we're not. I'm sure that the actor who got shot was probably a little let down that he didn't get his fight scene. But anyway, I absolutely adore it still to this day, and can look past any kind of, expectation I would have for a 2022 caliber film, because the acting is great. The writing is great. The way they introduce Indy at the beginning is so triumphantly beautiful. The music, is fantastic. And the way that they use the music is great too. At the beginning, when they introduce Indy, we don't see Indy at first. And then when he walks into the light at the beginning, the music kind of like drops. It's not like a rise in music. Like, here's Indiana Jones. It's ominous almost. Like, we don't know what this character is capable of yet. They don't give us they don't assign trust to Indiana Jones yet. And that completely plays out through their journey into the tomb, where they're trying to get the artifact. We don't really trust him. We don't trust the guys around him either, because one of the guys had just tried to shoot him and he stopped him with his whip. So we kind of trust the other guy, but not sure yet. And so anyway, it's just the whole scene, and then the iconic scene with the boulder coming down, and it's just so beautifully done in establishing who Indiana Jones is, that I don't know. It's one of my favorite ways to introduce a main character I mean,
Yeah.
I can't think of another one.
I agree. I mean, I don't know, certainly not off the top of my head. We'd have to huddle, right? And really put our heads together. But I think you're right. I mean, this has got to be the best, if not one of the best opening sequences of all time. Because you're right. It's not just, on the one hand, an opening sequence is important to establish the kind of film you're in, the world, some of the rules, expectations. And in this case, it was just a thrill, right? This nice 15-minute thrill ride of epic success and failures. But at the same time, you're also, like you said, introducing a new character. We don't know who this guy is yet. And so there's a lot of mystery and fun that you can have with that, because I mean, it's probably 2-3 minutes before we even see his face. The classic, like, we keep obscuring him, right? We're going to look at his shoes. We're going to look at him at his hand as he grabs this poison dart, and et cetera, until we never meet him until he's made his first action, of self-defense, right? Like, oh, I'm going to use my whip, my tool, to, knock the gun out of this guy's hand, because he's also not a cold-blooded murderer. That's also part of his appeal, and until push to shove, and that scene, and with the in the market in Cairo, shooting the swordsman. I can see why it wasn't in the script, but I can also see why it still works, because it wasn't cold blood. It was, this guy literally pulled a giant scimitar out of his belt. Like,
is that what that is? A scimitar?
It looked.
Oh, it's just a word you made up?
Yeah, well, it's a type of sword, and it's probably scimitar. I don't know. These are words that I read, people. I don't pronounce them. If you want a languager, you should have hired a Indiana. And so, I can see why it would work for his philosophy as a person. And so I think my feelings are very much identical to yours, in terms of, like, I don't think it holds up, perfectly. There's some sequences, even that whip scene at the beginning, you could feel it. It's a little stiff. It's it's static shot of belt, static shot of his hand cocking back the whip, and then a static shot of the gun getting knocked out. It's very unfluid. But as the film progresses, I feel like, Spielberg kind of got away from that, and he started making a little bit more fluid camera movements to help accentuate the action. And for maybe the introduction, this is just what still would make sense. I doubt it. I feel like you would probably make it a little bit quicker, and a little bit harder, just so that you can feel, I don't know, bang, bang, bang. Here, it feels like we're just standing on our feet, watching someone have a gun pointed at them for several seconds and not get shot. Like, it's a miracle.
Yeah.
The Ark was already opened apparently at the beginning of the film. And so it's pretty wild, but those moments aside, it still really works well. And the stuff that I think really bothers me, and that's not even the stuff that bothers me, is still forgivable. And I'll get to, I think, some of my smaller, it's a relative thing, hiccups, but overall, like, it's still a very functional film. I love your point about the set design and wardrobe. Like, it all still works. These are some really beautiful sets, and the photography is still gorgeous. Like, that shot of the sun, in the background of them working at the top of that hill, like, is just incredible. What a beautiful shot. And so many other shots are just absolutely gorgeous. Great characters. And that's what makes this a good movie ultimately, right? It relies on really good characters. Like you said, Marion is a great character. Indy, even the enemy Belloq, and was a really fascinating guy, because he's a Frenchman working with the Nazis, right? And who is he? He's trying to get Indy killed, but he's also trying to not let Marion get killed. Like, and so he's got some internal conflict that we can see him wrestling with. And even Indy kind of knows it and points it out. So you have all these really fascinating characters. The Nazis, a little less fascinating, but I just find it fascinating that Spielberg likes to use Nazis in this way. This isn't a dramatic film. This is a fluff piece. This entire movie is nothing but fluff. And that's kind of, I guess to jump my own gun here a little bit, that's kind of my only problem with this film is this isn't even popcorn. This is a roller coaster with nothing on the other side. Like you get out the same place you got in. Like it's not popcorn, it's cotton candy, zero redeemable value. Like popcorn at least has some nutritional, substance to it. Unless you're just dousing it in, all butter. But this has no substance to it almost at all. Like any substance you pull out of it, you're looking for, like you're creating it, the viewer.
Yeah.
Because
I think that to me, the only substance is at the very end where they put the Ark at Area 51, I guess, or whatever. Because then that makes me think, oh, there's more to this story. Are they going to make another one? Like that feels like substance to me.
Yeah.
But I totally agree. Other than that, I would say popcorn, but you're right. It's more cotton candy.
It's a great contrast to last week, right? We did Jurassic Park. And even though in some ways from the outside, these might look like the same kind of movie, just this, soulless adventure thrill ride. Jurassic Park had some really interesting philosophical questions that informed all the action. This has no real philosophical underpinning about the sacredness of the Ark or the sacredness of historical, properties. The idol really had nothing but, particularly important about it. It was just an artifact. It was just something that belongs in a museum. And so there's nothing governing the action or the fall of any characters here. It's just we have a desire, right? We have this MacGuffin that turns out to be a little bit more than a MacGuffin, the Ark that is driving all the action. And normally a MacGuffin doesn't quite have, I think, this much impact on the story as far as the resolution goes, right? The Maltese Falcon didn't suddenly come alive and eat everyone on screen. Like the Ark did. The Ark literally comes to life and devours everybody. But I guess circling back to my original point that Spielberg felt comfortable using Nazis in a completely soulless film. That's fluff. It's just, hey, I'm going to use. And I find it fascinating because he's Jewish. He has a very strong, history with telling stories about the Holocaust, and as we'll see next week, even more stuff about Israel. Like he clearly is not just Jewish in name only, right? He clearly has a very strong personal history and perspective about the Holocaust in particular, which that's the Nazis, and so. I find it really fascinating that he felt comfortable putting them in such a lighthearted film. And granted, they make for easy villains, but you have to remember he has to sit on set surrounded by Nazi paraphernalia. He has to create Nazi characters, and like you have to embed yourself in all this. And I just worry that as a society, we're losing a little bit of this ability to wrestle with these things and be okay having certain things around us that we don't like or that we find personally, violate our sense of self. And I love that because also it gives him a chance, I think, too, to make a lot of really fun Nazi deaths, right? Like, fine, I'll pay the piper, but I'm going to get my due, right? He's going to butcher these guys. One guy literally goes into a propeller. Like, how satisfying is that?
Fantastic.
And then, the rest, it's really nice because the Ark does the dirty work, right? God strikes down the Nazis, and it's a pretty satisfying victory and way to end the Nazi story. And so I think, it's an interesting thing to kind of dive into and look at and just kind of wrestle with internally. But it's great use of your mortal enemies.
Yes, totally agree.
Yeah, and it also sets up your enemy pretty well, or the threat, because if the Ark is really this big dangerous thing, it's also like it could be something that empowers Hitler, right? That's kind of the statement is, can you imagine the army holding this is unstoppable, basically, and Hitler wants it. And so they don't really hammer that home multiple times. They kind of just say it once and let it go. But yeah, growing up, back to the original idea here, big deal to me. Like Star Wars was, fairly big, I guess, but Indiana Jones for me was much, much bigger. Like my brother, for one of his birthdays, he got a whip and we beat the shit out of each other with this thing. Just bleeding.
Oh my God.
Hurting. Anyone who can master the whip, my hat's off to you, because that was not us. Despite all of our efforts,
That's hilarious.
I'm glad we just have functioning eyes after that, for years dealing with this thing, man. It was brutal, not good. And we could never figure out how he managed to make it work. Of course, now as adults, we realize that's a movie. They made it work because he didn't need it to work.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, and this is an interesting film to study too. A long time ago, this might have been like 10 years ago, Soderbergh. I want to say it was Soderbergh. I'm not 100% sure. But I want to say it was Soderbergh, Steven Soderbergh, who had a blog and he would just write about film thoughts. Like, as a filmmaker, here's what I'm studying, kind of thing. And this is someone that had already made incredible films, like Ocean's 11, right? Like just a titan already in his own right. And I have a lot of respect for Soderbergh. And maybe at some point we'll, touch on a few of his films. But he was just discussing on his blog Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And he was like, here's one thing I did. Spielberg is a master at visual storytelling. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to watch his movie muted and in black and white. And he was like, I'm going to upload it. He had a Vimeo account. He put it up on Vimeo.
Oh my God.
And so I watched like the first half of the film muted and in black and white to see what he was talking about, like just studying the visual language of Spielberg. And he made a big point about the opening sequence. And he's like, just look at, like, it's rising. We're going left to right and rising through nearly every single shot. And so you're telling a very strong visual story about, just getting from point A to point B. And we're going through the jungle. It doesn't matter what shot we're doing. Even some of these that look like we're from behind, you can still see us rising and moving slightly to the right.
That's a great point.
Just amazing. And so I don't have quite the patience of a Soderbergh, apparently. Maybe that's why I'll never be as good. But he just literally could sit and watch a movie on mute in black and white for 2 hours, which I guess isn't that hard to do if you're not a complete ass. But not I. And so, yeah, it's just fascinating the way that you can study someone like Spielberg for their visual acumen, because he is doing something really special every time he picks up the camera. And yeah, and I guess just a last little note on this big idea of Spielberg as a filmmaker coming into his own. He did Jaws in 1975. This came out in 1981. So there was 6 years between here and there. He made other films. It wasn't like he was just sitting on the sidelines trying to think of his next thing. Even before Jaws, he made several films, several TV movies. He made one that came into theaters, I guess. IMDb doesn't point it out as a TV movie, but I'd never even heard of this film. And so Spielberg was working, and it took a while before he hit his stride. And so, to, I guess, everyone out there, and speaking to myself, it's okay if you don't hit your stride your first time at bat, just try to keep getting up to bat. And that's the hard thing, is to have the guts to keep getting up and taking swings, because striking out in front of, 1,000 people, least fun, game ever. To keep stepping up to the plate, though, takes a lot of courage, and hopefully you have support along the way. I'm sure he did. I don't have Spielberg's clout or connections, and to some degree he built his own connections, but it takes courage one way or another, whether or not you have support. It takes a lot of guts to say, damn, this was close, but no cigar. I'm gonna keep going. So take heart, go study, just go look at his first 6 films and be like, oh, 2 of these were great. 4 of these I've never heard of. and I bet if I watch them, they'll have some highs, but they're not going to like blow my socks off. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
that's a great point, man. You gotta love the process, right? Of whatever it is that you're doing. You know, if this is, I saw somebody say, you know, sit down and write all the things you love to do, and then scratch out the stuff that you think that everybody loves doing, and then look and see what's the most important to you, whatever's left, what's the most important thing to you, and circle that. That's what you should be doing. And then I'm paraphrasing, but if what that is what you're doing, then you should just love the process. Right. And so like you love writing and making films. So you do that, and that's what you do. You know, I love writing and making music myself. So that's what I do. And I'm going to put stuff out. Maybe it'll hit, maybe it won't. But point is that I loved doing that. I love the process of doing that. And so you can't help but eventually get better, and then, you know, hopefully have some success. But that's even Spielberg, you know, like you're not born with talent. I'm sorry. You're not. You might be genetically 7 feet tall, and so you can play. You could be a basketball player, but you're not a good basketball player because you're 7 feet tall. Right? You're a good basketball player because you work your ass off, and you try to get better, more talent. It's the same thing for anything. So I resonate more with what you're saying.
Great point. So we'll look at a few things here real quick. Cinematography, framing. It's always, you know, this goes back to, you know, the master. There's simple stuff that he does that I just think is really, really good. In its simplicity. So one of the things, and this was like maybe a second long shot of the way he keeps geography on the screen. So there's this shot when Indy is on horseback and he's racing to try to save the donkey or whatever he's trying to do. I forget. He's catching up to the Ark, I guess. But he rides up on top of this hill to get a good look at everything. And when he rides at the top of the hill, it's a brief, wide shot of him on his horse on top of this little mountainous, rocky hill. And the way he framed it was almost in a third. The top third is where the horse was, and Indy on top of the horse. The bottom 2/3 gave space for the hill, the rocky hill. And so we can still feel that he's up on this hill because of the use of that framing, that composition. It kept him, you know, high on frame and showed us a lot of hill. Whereas I think most filmmakers, myself included, might fall into the pit of, oh, I want a shot of Indy on the horse. I'm going to frame him up nice and big and put him right there in the middle. And that's fine. It's not like that it's the wrong way to do it, but you do lose a sense of the geography of the scene because this is a very quick, you know, cut. He rides up onto this hill, he gets a view, and then he's back down. He's running again. And so just with this, you know, composition, he's able to keep us oriented within all the movement of the landscape because we're on horseback, we're in jeeps and trucks, and so the scenery is changing very, very quickly. And just having the idea that I'm going to make sure we feel him on top of this hill, it was just a very simple way to reinforce the geography of what was going on within the context of the scene. And in a completely different way, I love the blocking. You know, towards the end, I guess, through some very simple framing. It's the scene at the boat where Sallah is saying goodbye, right? He says goodbye to Indy. They have that long, awkward hug. And then Sallah steps up stage downstage towards camera. And now he's really big in the frame left. But we can still see the boat captain talking to Indy and Marion and saying, hey, I'm going to take care of you, blah, blah, blah. And they say, thank you, whatever. And then Marion steps, downstage right up into the camera and says goodbye, right? Gives him the kisses on the cheek and one on the lips. And then they walk away. And then he like his eyes bloom, right? And then he starts singing this big operatic song, and goes and kisses one of his men or whatever, and then walks off and walks by the boat, and we see Marion and Indy kind of wave and cut. And it's this one shot, and I love it because through blocking, without moving the camera, we're able to kind of get a medium at the beginning, and then Sallah steps up, and then Marion steps up. Now we can get a close up of this kiss, which is important so that we can see his reaction, right? It's this really sweet, tender moment between two friends. And then she leaves, and we're staying there where we get to hang out with him. And then as he leaves, finally we start moving the camera. And so through mostly blocking and a little bit of camera movement, we're able to get a medium, a close up, and a wide, and without ever having to cut. Like, it's very simple, and it's very Spielberg. And I feel like just it's his simplicity, and more, I adore simplicity of really good storytelling. And he's just a king. Yeah.
And that also, I love that moment too. That also heightens the moment for Sallah, whom we love. We love that character. He's helped Indy the whole time, and we don't even know why necessarily, like they're just friends, and they've been friends for a while. And so we kind of want that for him. And by not cutting away, it's more of a real moment where it's not made up through cuts. It's like, no, it exists in itself, and then we get to experience that with him. So yeah, great point.
Yeah. And Sallah, just as a side story here, I don't know what to make of this character. It never occurred to me until putting together the notes that that's John Rhys-Davies. And I feel pretty confident he's not Egyptian. And so it starts, I don't know if that's brown face, but if it is, that's not good. I don't know what to do with that.
No, I don't. I don't think so. Either.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's just a Brit, Yeah, I hands off on that one. I don't know. Do better.
I mean, in 1981, we've had Tropic Thunder since then. So
that was a whole other thing. That would be a fun movie to cover, but because that's harpooning a lot of stuff.
I totally get it.
But we also had Short Circuit after this. And that's Fisher Stevens in like pretty hardcore brown face. Dicey stuff. I don't know. I don't know enough about John Rhys-Davies. I know he's like Welsh, but maybe his family's from elsewhere. I don't know. Anyway,
let's not go down that road.
Moving on. Worth noting and probably chewing on, but I don't have the insight on exactly what's going on there. And so some of the other cinematography stuff that I love that he's doing is some of the dramatic flair and some of the cheating that he does with, just use of a cut or use of something he's doing in frame. I think there's probably a lot of dramatic stuff happening. If you look at how Indy, like Harrison Ford, as he runs through the streets, sometimes like if he overruns a path, right, he has these really big physical movements. And so there's a lot of physical acting. That's kind of the stuff I'm talking about. But a really primo example of it is the end of that opening sequence. He gets on the plane. He gets in the plane, right? The whole snake. I hate snakes. That's just my pet Reggie. And whatever. We cut to the sunset and they fly off. That shot of the plane riding off into the sunset, it's tilting heavily left to right? It's almost cartoonish and just how unsteady it is and unstable. And it could have easily just been flown off like a normal plane, right? I don't think a pilot is showing his mettle by wobbling. But doing that, right, it adds like a really nice juice to the scene. And that's the kind of story this is. Some stories that would not be good in, like you wouldn't want to do that in a Bond film. But you can do that in an Indiana Jones film, right? Because this is that kind of silly, over the top drama, and having that plane just kind of shake back and forth as it's, doing its thing. That's fun. It's dramatic and it's flair for the story. It works really well. And a similar but wildly different idea of being able to cheat, you know, for the sake of the type of film you're doing. Man, Indy just appears places. We never see him get anywhere. He's just there. Like that shot on the boat, everyone's like, where's he at? And then he's just suddenly on the submarine. And then once the submarine arrives, he's just suddenly on land and hiding in the docks. Like, that's a great use of a cut. Like, we can imagine how he's doing that, right? And it kind of adds to his mystique. We don't need to earn those moments. And Spielberg is just a master at knowing when to cheat, like perspective or the story a little bit. And this is a really good example of, you know, it doesn't matter how he got there. He's there. He's freaking Indiana Jones. That's what matters. I love it. It's you know, classic Spielberg.
In my research, I did a little bit of research. They actually shot a scene that they deleted of him holding on to the mast of the submarine as the submarine was like, you know, driving away. And actually, if you look at at the frame where it's coming to the island, you can see someone at the top
and
of
the wide, yeah,
and that's supposed to be him. That's supposed to be him.
Crap.
So they shot it, but then he decided to remove it later because of that exact trick you were talking about. Just like, let's just be there. We don't need it, whatever. So
he
just shows up someplace.
That's
I know,
nice
right?
that he
Isn't
covered
cool?
his bases. Yeah, that's a good thing to do too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it kind of goes to the heart of this whole film, which is it's pure visual storytelling, right? The opening sequence has hardly any dialogue, hardly a word from Indy. And we're just traipsing through the jungle. Someone runs off, right? Scared. Oh, there's a statue. I know where we are. Oh my God, I gotta go. Literally screaming through the frame. And then, you know, someone else runs off, right? The guy who's like, we shouldn't be here. And he pulls his gun. And he runs off without the screaming, though I'm sure when he died, he probably screamed a little. And then we enter a cave, right? Avoid all these traps. We get the golden idol. We escape, right? It's just, and this whole film is that. It's long sequences of action, just butted up against each other, one after another. And every rare once in a while, we'll get a breather. But for the most part, it's a fairly breathless film. And that's this entire movie. That's what makes it fun and gives rise to the roller coaster film. It's like, oh, who cares if, you know, we didn't learn a moral lesson at the end of it. I had a great time. And that gets into the story and writing, because they still do need to do some work. You can't just, you know, run through this thing. And one of the things that they really have to do is set up the fantastic, because you have this ending that's wild, right? You would never have like the Holy Ghost in a Bond film, right? That suddenly comes and saves the day. And so in order to earn that, you got to set it up a lot. And they do a lot, right? We start at the very beginning. After the opening sequence, he's in his class, whatever. He gets pulled out, and there's these G-men who are like, hey, we're looking for this thing. And so he opens the book. We see a drawing of the Ark, and they start asking, what is all that? It's lightning, it's fire, it's the power of God or something. And that's when Brody, I think, says, the army which carries the Ark before it is invincible. Well, Hitler's looking for it, right? And so you have this idea of Hitler with the Ark starting taking place. We had that clip that I played at the beginning of the show, right? Where, Indy, you have bigger problems than Marion. For 3,000 years, man has been searching for it, for the Ark, and no one knows its secrets. And then you have Belloq, I think, right? Or no, it's Sallah, right? Death has always surrounded it, right? It is not of this earth. And then Belloq, I think, has this comment about, do you realize what the Ark is? It's a transmitter for talking with God. So throughout the entire film, they keep building up the Ark and what's in it and the power of it. And so whenever they finally open it up, we're expecting it. It's not like this surprise. It's like, no. What's going to happen when they open up this Ark? This is a massive biblical concept with a lot of weight, you know, for anybody in the Judeo-Christian world. And so it's really important. It comes with a lot of built-in heaviness. And so using all these buildups, finally we get to this moment. okay, we've earned it. We can have this really wild, frenetic finale that is like, dang, yeah, that don't want to do that. Like shouldn't open that box. Yeah, and so let's look at a little bit of Indy as a hero, as an action hero. It's a lot of fleshing him out, right? To your point, like they created a really good character. They gave him a really good introduction. And part of that introduction was he's unaffected. He's unaffected by everything. These booby traps. Good, cool. Which, by the way, if you ever find a booby trap that works after 1,000 years, that is incredible. Like we've never found anything, from antiquity that still operates because stuff breaks down. That's time. And so there in no universe would a booby trap still be functional. And so Indy is a hero, right? Unaffected by all that stuff, traps or whatever, unaffected by spiders. That's a horrific scene, right? With all the tarantulas everywhere. And so we set up his, like, he's unafraid of everything until he gets in the plane, hates snakes. And then we see him get thrown in a snake pit, right? That's great. But not because it really has any bearing on the story, because it doesn't. It really impacts the story absolutely none. It doesn't stop him, doesn't help him. It's just there. It's just character flair. And that's all this movie is. It's all window dressing. But it's fun because now we have an actor reacting to something, right? And it's really fun to see him. Oh, there's a boa constrictor. I hate snakes. And he's freaking out. Cool. Well, let's really watch him freak out in like a pit with thousands of these things. That's fun. That's entertaining, right? Yeah, why not? And so Indy as a hero has a weakness, but it's not that big a deal. Same thing. He's smart, right? This is a core to his character, is how intelligent he is. He knows his history intimately and even reveres it. And he's good at the archaeology. Watching him work is very like cool, because you have this local here who's about to get his, butt darted. And he's like, you should stay here. He's like, if you insist, Indy. He doesn't want to go up there. And it's just really smart to watch Indy doing all this stuff because he's really good at it. And yet he constantly fails spectacularly, right? He has all these epic failures, which is why this movie is fun in the first place, right? He barely escapes the booby-trapped tomb, right? He loses the idol to his enemy and barely escapes with his life. That was fun. That was entertaining. What else can we see him do? Like, let's put him through some other stuff. He loses Marion after a lengthy chase. He's giving it his all. He's really trying to save her. In fact, he's annoying all the locals in downtown Cairo and knocking over all their stuff. Like, hey, what the F, bro? And finally finds her. He's about to rescue her and she explodes, right? That was a really bad loss. And he goes and drinks it off. Okay, whatever. He finds out she's alive. He finds the Ark, loses the Ark, and is left for dead, right? That's a really big win followed by a really heavy loss. And then he loses his fight against the big German, right, at the airplane with the propeller. Luckily, he gets bailed out, right? And he's smart enough to duck. That's kind of his saving grace is, I'm not going to do that, what you're about to do. And that's ultimately how he wins a lot, right? Because he regains the Ark at the end and then loses it and Marion all in one fell swoop all over again. And then ultimately God does the dirty work, and it's his victories, quote unquote, are really due to his intelligence. Very rarely does his brawn win out. Like he might throw a few good punches, but he also takes a lot of good punches too. So it's really never, like his sense of brawn that wins, which is why I also think that gun fight is so good and so pointed, because it underlines his intelligence. He sees a guy twice his size with a really large sword, and he's like, I could fight you. I'm smart enough not to, right? I have nothing to prove here. Bang, let's get on with it. And so his intelligence ultimately wins out. And that's what makes him a character worth rooting for. Is he does some of these scummy things. Obviously, he and Marion have some kind of sordid history, but she forgives him. We can forgive him too. She goes along for the ride, and so we'll go along too. And no matter what he's doing, we do have a sense of principle that he's working with, and he doesn't violate it. I don't feel like he ever violates it. And he holds strong to that, and that makes him worth rooting for. And also, you know, he's sympathetic because he is a bit of an underdog, and how often he gets his ass handed to him. And that makes him worth rooting for as well. It's everything you said at the beginning, right? He's attainable. I can be that big of a screw up.
Yeah, I mean, the next time you're trapped in a cave with a bunch of
Vipers.
with a bunch of snakes, you're gonna find a pillar, you know, and knock it over into the wall. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you ever do that when you're watching a movie like this, where you think, okay, the next time that I'm tied up, you know, and gagged by a villain, this is what I'm gonna do because Indy did it. You know, I do that all the time. Like, okay, I'm gonna log that away in my brain for the next time that happens.
Got that covered. Scenario 2.
Got it covered. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and that's what makes this really fun, right? Because it's relying on really fun stuff, good characters. The music is such a big part of this movie. The movie doesn't work without the music. You get kind of bored with the action sequences, but the music adds so much flair to it that you can't help but be entertained. And it's a little Mickey Mousing in that way. We've talked a little bit about Mickey Mousing before here and there, but it's the idea, if you've ever seen the Mickey Mouse Club at the beginning, right? They have the words at the bottom of the screen, and they have the little bouncing ping pong ball that taps every single word as they sing along so that you can sing along to the Mickey Mouse Club song. Same thing. Music can accentuate the moment exactly as it's happening, right? That's Mickey Mousing it. Your editing can do the same thing, where you just constantly edit everything on the nose, and it can be exhausting if you're not doing it right. Luckily, you have Spielberg and John Williams at the helm. Mm-hmm. You're in good hands. And so watching like someone, Indy, get punched with this big, you know, musical riff, it's funny, it's entertaining, it's very Mickey Mouse, and it adds to the humor, right? These movies work because of the lighthearted humor at stake. Even though there's some brutal violence that happens, you never feel the brutality of it because of everything else at play, the adventure, the humor. During that sequence when we meet Marion, Indy shoots a guy in the face and he bleeds out.
I had to turn it off because Simon was watching it with me. And I was like, okay, all right, no. For a second, he ended up watching the whole thing, but I didn't let them see the end when the Ark is open.
That's hardcore.
That's brutal. Yeah.
But yeah.
To your point though about the music, really quickly, last night, I just saw that John Williams unveiled a new piece of music for Indy 5, which is coming out next year.
It's coming out next year.
Next year.
God.
Yeah.
You mean Indy 4. And so because Indy 4 still hasn't happened.
Because we don't talk about that.
That's correct.
We just don't. Yeah, agreed.
I'm really excited for the fourth installment.
I mean, that is a heavy duty refrigerator is all I'll say about Indy 4. Okay. I will not talk about anything else.
But this whole series, this whole saga is a really fun, fresh take on a superhero. Watching our hero get his ass kicked and finagle away to come out on top, it's just pure entertainment. We don't really need it to be more. If it could be more, that's not a bad thing. But it's fine that it isn't. We'll see. I know we're going to cover one more of these in a couple weeks, and so we'll see if that changes or not. I honestly don't know, and so I'll go in with that curiosity in mind. Yeah. So that's all I got, man. Any final thoughts?
That's all. No, not really. I think I said everything I wanted to say. I love this film. I still love this film. What?
You said it well.
Oh, thank you. I still love the film. I think it's super fun. I don't always like the saying, well, I could overlook this and I can overlook that. I think it's a cop out in a lot of ways. But for a movie like this, I think that there's so much that had never happened before that it's kind of like listening to a Beatles album, like an original, like a first, I don't know, not Abbey Road, because Abbey Road is timeless and it's perfect in every way, I would say. But like, Help or something. It's kind of like listening to that, where it's like, it's bubblegum, it's poppy, but nobody had ever done it before. And so you can listen to it and you can forgive a lot because, it was the first time that had happened. And because it changed everything after it. Like you said at the beginning, there's before Indiana Jones and then there's after Indiana Jones. And we've never lived in a world where there wasn't the Beatles or there wasn't Indiana Jones. And so imagine not having those things, right? And the fact that it was done so well, like the car, I just keep going back to that car chase scene. I think that is, for 1981, is just unbelievable how they shot that. I can't.
That's so much work. What you have to realize, dear listener, is that's not just, here's a road. Oh, this works. We're going to have a man dragged behind, a car on this road. It does not work that way. It takes so much money and resources because you need someone that might be a 1 mile strip that they're going to film on. And you need people to go over every inch of that road, grab every single rock, pat it, make sure, it's got a nice powder of dirt, so that no one breaks anything. And accidents still happen. Like I met a guy on a stuntman a while back, and he told me about this horrific accident that he had falling off a horse. And he had a bracelet on, and the bracelet caught onto something on the ground. I
don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it.
It was bad,
Don't say it.
right? And so, he was like, yeah, it took me, a few weeks of recovery, but, I love my work. And that's so cool for a stunt man to be like, I've been injured so many times doing so many weird little simple things. And yet, here I am. I'm ready. I'm signing back up. And it takes people with expertise and patience and understanding to go through and know what to look for to go through this road. If you're watching that scene of him underneath the truck, right, you can see they clearly dug out a nice rivet in the bottom, maybe for safety, but also maybe just because you needed a better shot of him and so we can see his face. Who knows? Maybe both. But it takes so much care and precision to make something so simple that lasts for 5 minutes on screen. That's weeks of work for, a stunt crew. And so, yeah, you're right, man. That's worth watching and being in awe of because it's still relevant today. It's incredible.
100%. And they're always on the same, they did a great job of the 180 rule that you talk about all the time in that shot. We're always coming from the driver's side angle, no matter what, the beginning, middle, and end of it. It's just textbook.
Yeah.
Absolute perfection. I think is one of my favorite car chase scenes I've ever, and there have been some incredible, right now, over the last 5-10 years, they've made incredible car chase films. I mean, and I'm not talking about Michael Bay stuff. I'm talking about stuff with substance and important, seminal shots, right? Scenes. But it always, to me, will go back to something like this. It was just, I don't know. It's just really, really amazing. And so to your point, there are 100 people who you don't see that went into that scene, that had a major role. I mean, the guy driving the car with the camera on it had to be perfect. The guy running the camera the guy pulling focus had to be perfect. Obviously the guy underneath the car, that was a real dude. That was a real person underneath the car, right? And so when we talk about I don't know, Tom Cruise doing his own stunts, right? These are real people doing these real things. And it's unbelievable now. I mean, because we have a whole nother level of safety now than they had in 1981. Also keep that in mind. That guy was probably not attached to a harness that was attached to the truck. So if he slipped and let go, I mean, I have no idea, but probably something bad would happen. But I don't know. It was just
wild.
Yeah,
Just
really
wild.
Amazing, really wild. Yes, yeah.
There's also a shot here, man, that I just really loved. I mentioned that sunset shot or maybe a sunrise where they're on the hilltop, but we cut to this other shot of Belloq walking with the Nazis, and Belloq runs up and realizes, who's that on the hillside, digging. We didn't have people over there. And so it's this really brief shot where he runs up and jumps on whatever, this rail track or something. And he's like, who's that over there? And what blows me away is those are there's two separate shots that happen with Belloq there. There's this wide shot of we're panning or we're dollying left to right. And then we stop as he notices this thing in the distance and he runs up, and then we cut to a close up, slightly close up. It's still pretty wide, but it's maybe a medium wide, and for him to deliver his line. And what impresses me is the sun hardly moves between those two shots. And so I just kept thinking, it's like, how did he do that? And so I don't know if they were on a zoom and maybe they zoomed in, but these are anamorphics. And so I don't know what lens that would have been, or maybe they had a different rig set up, like on sticks, so that, hey, we're going to cut to this other one. And maybe it was just a whole other camera rig set up with a longer lens to catch the shot. I don't know, but the time lapse between those shots looks like it's 0 and it's immediate. And the sun moves fast at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day. The sun moves very, very quickly, and it might not feel quickly if you're just sitting there watching it, but when you need to swap lenses, get on a tripod, roll another take, it runs very, very quickly. Like those things can take minutes, and in minutes the sun can move several degrees, and so I was just really impressed. It didn't look like there was, and I didn't go frame by frame and compare, but to me, watching it, I was like, whoa, that looked like fluid, completely fluid. Yeah, if you've ever tried to
That's
capture
awesome.
the sun, you know what I'm talking about.
And those are things that, like the normal viewer would not notice, right? But that matter. Those are the definition of the genius of Spielberg, right? Who I talk shit about, all the time. But in the end, he's a genius. He's one of the best.
Absolutely, hands
yeah.
down. Nice. What are you gonna recommend this week?
Yeah. So, you've been getting me on the Hulu train lately. I've been like, just bouncing around. And one of the good things about Hulu is that I think that their algorithm is really good in that, I'll watch a show and then it'll feed me into another one. That, turns out to be something that I enjoy. And, so I started watching a show on Hulu called Married. That's been around for a while. It's from 2015, I think it started. And it's funny. It's endearing. If you're married, it's like very on the nose. I mean, the first episode, the dude wants to have more sex and she's just not having it, and whatever. But at the end of the day, they're best friends. And so, it's not like one of those terrible shows that makes it seem like so awful to be married, but it is very honest and unique in that way. I don't think if you're married, you probably are just like apathetic about it. And I totally get that. But if you are, it's something it's fun to watch. And the episodes are pretty quick. It's an FX show. So FX just kills it. I just absolutely love and adore FX. They're like 30 minutes or less, so easy to watch.
I watched that pilot and I was like, oh my God, I can't. Like, it stressed me out. Like it was so good. Like it was really, really good. And I was like, oh man.
It's very it's very accurate for most people, I think. Not everybody, obviously, but I think most people. But yeah, I can totally get, if you're not married or you're not in that world or you don't, it's not something that I would recommend to you. But if you are, I just watch the first episode.
Oh, that's so good. And it's got the cast is great. Judy Greer and Matt Nixon. I always forget his name.
Yeah, something like that. His last name, I can't remember.
He's solid, and she deserves a much better career than she's had. Like she's incredibly talented.
I agree. They always give her these like small mom roles, or whatever. Anyway,
it's pretty jacked up. So I'm going to recommend new film out by George Miller. If you're familiar with the Mad Max series, he's finally, to me anyway, I think he's done a lot of animation stuff, which was a surprise as I was looking through his filmography. But he finally stepped away from all that to do something new. And it's a movie called 3,000 Years of Longing. It's got Tilda Swinton and Idris Elba, and I was in heaven. Like I just adored it. I think it's a really fun movie. It's really imaginative. It's refreshing, and just a new take on whatever storytelling, really. And so I just appreciated that fresh breath of air. You know, I've been wanting. I always appreciate someone that kind of says, "I'm going to do my own thing," and he very much did. And so, hats off to George Miller. Really fun story. Highly recommend it. Catch it in theaters if you can. Yeah, I like to support stories in theater of stuff that I want to see more of. And so, even if maybe I catch a free screening of something that I love, I try to go and like go see it again, maybe just to, you know, pay a few bucks for the privilege. Yeah. So stay tuned. Next week, we continue on the Spielberg train. I was trying to avoid using that word. We're going to take a look at Munich. And so, yeah, stay tuned for that. We'll see what he's doing on the serious side of stuff. This is one of his far more severe films. And so worth talking about. And yeah, stay tuned for that. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget, drop us a note. If you want us to talk about something, kinds of things you find interesting, shout out to you. He sent us an email recommending a nice, I think it was a French film that has been on my radar since it came out, and I just never stopped to watch it. And so appreciate that. I'll take a look at it and yeah, finally get around to that. And so if you want to leave a comment on this episode in particular, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/Raiders of the Lost Ark.
And our quote of the day is from Richard Branson. The brave may not live forever, but the cautious do not live at all. It's wow.
Oh.
That's very Indy.
It's very Indy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What made you pull this from Richard Branson?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just trying to think of people that you might call, I don't know if he would be a modern day Indiana Jones, but he's an adventurer, right? He's a big risk taker. And that's been his whole story, it sounds like, right? If anyone's heard the story of how he got Virgin Galactic started, his airplane, or whatever you call that. What do you call those things?
Airline.
Airline. Thank you. Started was, he was on a layover and flights had been canceled to the destination that he was trying to get. And he was trying to finagle a way to still make his flight. And he decided, oh, you know what I'm going to do? He went and found a pilot, hired him, and slapped a sign outside that was like, hey, flights to wherever, Geneva, $50, and sold the flight, made some money off and was able to pay the pilot and pay for the gas or whatever, and made a few bucks on top. And that kind of launched his idea for Virgin Galactic Airlines. Virgin Airlines. Yeah. And so that's the myth. That's the way I've always heard it. And so I'll see if I can verify that and put it in the show notes. But that's kind of been him. He's just this big risk taker, right? He flew I think he paid for a space flight, off, I want to say it was his own Virgin Galactic company. Maybe not. Whatever. It's really cool that, he's obviously made a ton of money and he's still not afraid to take big risks. And that's not a bad lesson, right? Like, yeah, you can be cautious, right, and never take any risks, or you can risk it, and maybe have a story to tell and some excitement at the other end, maybe some rewards. Who knows?
Yeah, great quote. Love it. I got nothing to add. I hope that story is true. I think it's amazing. Yeah. I love that kind of stuff. All right, thank you guys so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Wes, thank you for all your insight. I think a film like this, really, I love listening to you talk about it. You're such a student of the game, and a film like this gives you lots to talk about. So it's a lot of fun.
Thanks,
fun. Make sure you join us next week. We're doing Munich. Share this with your friends. Review us. Subscribe. All that good stuff. That all helps tremendously. And let us know if there's a film you'd like us to cover. We'd love to hear from you. Until next week, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.